You know it's this. Take a perk and a talk of that shit. Money swallowing like sis. Did it perfect in the kid. Got a billion who sang on my head. Look up better put on the road I just spent. I know we got $1 million. The devil that shit ain't not cheaper again.
Hello and welcome back, fellow anime lovers, to MangaMuse. I am delighted to have you join us once again in the world of fanfiction and fantasy. This is the third part of What If Deku Meets Owlhouse. Special note, this fanfic is written and a masterpiece of deathly jazz hands 55 on FANFICTIONnet. Do check and support the author too. Now smash the like, share and subscribe button for more. Also press the bell icon so that you never miss such great parts. Thanks for the introduction. Now let's dive into the world. Luz Nocida. A pleasure to finally make your acquaintance. It's time that we've had a little chat. As those words left the mysterious man's mouth, Luz couldn't help but feel more than a little trepid about him. Her inner, stranger danger, alarm blared like a warning siren during an air raid, signaling to her to stay away from this man, as if he were some kind of threat. Just by looking at him, she knew that was the case. The moment she laid eyes on him was the moment she knew that something was off about him. But there was just something about him that she couldn't shake. Something that she couldn't quite figure out. Something that made her inherently curious about the man, and allowed her to, at least partially, drop her guard around him. As if she knew inherently that he wouldn't lay a finger on her. Yes, it was obvious that he was dangerous. He was a threat. But she knew, instinctively, he was not a threat to her. And it all came down to how he appeared in front of her. From his relaxed expression to his inviting tone of voice, to the fact that he hadn't moved even an inch from where he sat. And while he had a rather uncomfortable aura around him, to her, he didn't seem that bad. Besides, there was also the fact that she had been here before. She had been in this exact spot, facing these exact thrones on the exact same platform, standing in the exact same position. The only difference was that now, there sat a man in one of the thrones. The only thing missing was the strange, ominous presence in the void-like room. And, if she had to guess. You're that presence from before. The one that shot me out of this place yesterday. You said something to me in Japanese back then. What was it? I couldn't understand you. The man hummed, his thin-lipped smile widening ever so slightly, a hint of amusement in his eyes. Ah, so you didn't forget. I would have assumed you would have. Very well. I told you to wake up, and that your fate awaits you, the man said as Luz raised an eyebrow. My fate? Yes, Luz. Your fate, the man continued, before gesturing to the throne next to him, Luz looking over at it with a hint of suspicion. Which is preciously what I wish to talk to you about. More specifically, the role in which you will serve to play. In order to do that, however, I advise you to take a seat. Luz's stare lingered on the throne, a combination of emotions running through her all at once, all of which were positive. It was inviting, to say the very least. It also looked insanely comfortable. From the deep red cushions and armrests to the fact that it sat just high enough off the ground that it would make her feel tall, and to the fact that her body ached all over, she could really go for a sit-down right about now. But, a part of her, the same part of her that was warning her to stay away from the man, told her that sitting next to him would be a bad thing. Her gut instinct, so to speak, and it had yet to be wrong. She looked back to the man, her expression containing a bit of defiance as she spoke. I prefer to stand. Very well, the man said, straightening his posture, seeming entirely nonplussed about the whole ordeal. However, as he straightened his posture and adjusted how he sat, Luz noticed a shift in his body language. A slight one, but one nonetheless. She had learned from a young age that body language was an important thing to decipher during conversations. Years of being bullied and tolerating what was essentially borderline abuse from her classmates forced her to learn such a thing. The way his body shifted from a calm, relaxed, hardly concerned individual offering up information to someone who was more upfront and businesslike caused Luz to feel slightly more tense than when she had first shown up here. Wherever here was, exactly. She knew it was a dreamscape, seeing as the only time she had been here she had fallen asleep, but that was about it. A part of her considered that maybe he was the reason why she was being pulled into this place. Or maybe, the last 2 times, it was a fluke, and this time it was on purpose. Either way, it weirded her out. As the man finished adjusting himself, he spoke. But first, I'm sure you have questions. Go on, ask away. We have some time to burn. Not a lot, mind you, so do keep that in mind. Keep the questions simple, if you can. Luz frowned, crossing her arms, speaking the first question that came to her mind. Well, not her first question, but still a rather important question nonetheless. Who are you? I am your predecessor. You may call me Shigaraki Rikitasu, though do keep it to Shigaraki for now. In my culture, only family and lovers should call one another by their first name, unless that person is a teacher or boss, of which I act as the former to you, hence, I call you Luz instead of Nosita. Makes sense, yes, the man, Shigaraki, said as Luz uncrossed her arms, confusion littering her expression. While yes, that did make sense, that wasn't what had her confused. What confused her was the first thing that he had said. Predecessor. What are you talking about? I've never seen you in any family photos before. And I'm certain I don't have any Japanese BLD in me. Mama would have mentioned it in one of her drunk ramblings by now, Luz said, apprehension in her voice as Shigaraki hummed. We'll get to that. Now, this is the last question for now, so make it important. I won't accept another question until we next meet that isn't directly related to the conversation at hand, Shigaraki replied, giving her a non-answer, which frankly annoyed her. But, considering the gleam in his eyes was practically telling her to not ask further, Luz decided to move on to the most pressing question that she had in mind. The one that had been burning in her mind the moment she laid eyes on him. What do you want? Luz asked, an edge to her voice as Shigaraki chuckled, and when he did, she couldn't help but feel a shiver claw down her spine. If she hadn't thought him to be at least somewhat evil before, she definitely did now. His laugh was deep, filled with just a hint of malice that was either intentional or not, and his eyes gleamed in such a way that it gave her a hint of what kind of person the man before her was. Depraved. That was the best way she could describe that glint in his eyes. He was the type of person who reveled in others' suffering. The kind of person who would go out of their way to cause people harm just for a bit of a laugh. Someone who would kick and stomp on puppies just because they got in his way, or accidentally peed on his shoes, or perhaps even just for the fun of it. And she was in the same room, space, dreamscape, whatever this place was, with him. There was no exit, no form of escape, no nothing that she could do to leave. She had no choice to but wait until she woke up or met whatever conditions had to be met to get away from him. And that was assuming she even could get away from him, especially if that voice that had told her to watch out for the root in the path was most likely his, considering it shared the same cadence, the same accent, and the same baritone tone to it. If it was his, that implied that he was in her head, and that partially, no, outright terrified her to think that such a man was in her head. Finally, after what felt like forever, Shigaraki responded. Well, Luz, you're going to have to be a little more specific with that question. I want a lot of things. None of those things, however, are worth you knowing. So, elaborate a little, will you? After all, such a multifaceted question will just extend the conversation without a clear point A and point B, you know? And we are on borrowed time. I wouldn't like to waste even a single second, Shigaraki answered as Luz's expression tightened, her frown turning into a thin line as she clenched her teeth together. She could already tell that talking to this guy was going to get infuriating quickly. It was like talking to a slimy lawyer or a politician. Always being met with half-truths and semi-answers rather than the full truth and complete answers. leaving just enough information to be able to piece together the puzzle, but strategically leaving out key pieces so that someone couldn't, nor would they be able to, see the complete unfiltered, unedited picture. What do you want with me? Luz clarified, a slight sensation of concern and annoyance in her voice as Shigaraki hummed, steepling his fingers together as his thin-lipped smile turned into a slightly toothy one, sitting up straight as he tilted his head to the side ever so slightly. Why, isn't it obvious, Luz? I wish to enlighten you about your power. After all, you were on the right track before, so I believe it's about time that I give you the full picture. And seeing as now the connection has been fully established, should our time cut short, I can always continue this conversation with you at a later date. As he said that, his voice gained a subtle hint of excitement. As if he was proud of something. What that something was, Luz didn't know. But whatever it was, she didn't know what to necessarily think about. Maybe he was referring to the connection, as he had just mentioned. What would be so exciting about whatever this connection was? Maybe it was like a Kurama and Naruto type thing. But, if that was the case, then why would he be excited? Wouldn't he be annoyed? Again, it was far too confusing for her to think about, and it gave her a headache trying to piece it all together. As she had noted, she didn't want to really think about it right now to spare herself the migraine for later. What she did want to think about, or in this case vocalize, was what he had just said. You know more about my power? Luz said cautiously, her eyes narrowing ever so slightly, signaling distrust, something that he noticed as he smirked. Yes, Luz. I know your power very intimately, there's no need to cast suspicion. I'm being completely forthright with you here. Besides. As he said that, he raised the palm of his hand in her direction, and as he did, her eyes widened. There, in the center of his palm, was a small dime-sized hole. The very same dime-sized hole that was on her palms. The power you have in your possession, Luz, was once mine. Luz's mind ground to a halt. A flurry of questions raced about in her head, her eyes sparkling with wonder the likes of which only rivaled when she found something to hyperfixate on. Shigaraki, the man in front of her, could give her valuable information about her seemingly useless power. Especially considering that, at least according to him, he used to be the one who owned this power. Any of his information was invaluable, and her curiosity was killing her. But then, she was brought back down to reality when she remembered everything else she had noticed about him. While his information was useful, there was no way she was going to listen to him. Not at all. No way, not going to happen. But even so, it wasn't like she had much of a choice. The best she could do was take what he had to say with a truckload of salt. Given that this man looked to be, at the very least, a bad person given his whole demeanor, she quickly controlled her excitement, dialing it back as she spoke. We share a power then? Shigaraki rested the hand he was showing her on his left knee, before leaning back into the throne he sat on. Well, if I was still alive, we'd share a power. But, as it stands, I am dead. I have been dead for a long time. I only truly regained consciousness when you awakened to your power. As he said that, he shifted in his seat. Though speaking of your power, I must say I am more than a little disappointed that you have yet to use it. How can I use something that I don't even know how to use? Luz asked incredulously, her tone gaining a slightly angered edge to it. Really? Disappointed? Who was he, some random stranger, to be disappointed in her over something she barely even knew a thing about? To that, Shigaraki merely chuckled, almost waving off her annoyance, a hint of arrogance in his eyes. Fair enough. Though, I guess I should tell you something about that power of yours, what it means for you, and more importantly, the world around you. As Shigaraki spoke, his voice gained a weight to it. The kind of weight that would be reserved for speaking about a dangerous weapon, like a gun, a bomb, or a knife. There was a caution to his tone. Not a wariness, but something else. Something she couldn't describe. A warning, almost. Like a police officer talking about gun safety to a child in one of those gun safety classes that they did in high school for the 12th graders. It honestly made Luz a little nervous. What was so dangerous about her power? What do you mean? Luz asked as Shigaraki sighed. To make a long-winded speech short. Your power, Luz, makes you nothing short of a god. Or, I guess, in your case, a goddess. The power you have quite literally in the palm of your hands is unlike anything this world will ever see. It is a rare kind of power, one that only those who have the right to own it can manifest. The power you have, Luz, will make you unrivaled, undefeatable, unkillable. Of course, should you use it right. With enough guidance, Luz, you can become a goddess in human form. A testament to power. You are, for what it's worth, the chosen one. As those words filled her brain, all Luz could think about was that last part. She was the chosen one. Her. Wimpy, lame, pathetic, Luz Nocida was the chosen one. Was he being serious? Or was he just saying that? His tone of voice said to her that he was being extremely serious. So much so that he almost sounded inhuman for a moment. As if she was speaking to a demon or monster from some other world given human form. For a moment, she almost bought into what he was saying. But, the more she thought about it, and the more she dug into his words, the way he hyped up her power almost made her not believe him. For starters, if her power would make her unkillable, then how come he was dead? Did he die of natural causes, old age, or was he killed? If he had the same power as her, then shouldn't he be alive right now? It was contradictory, and she had noticed it almost right away. If my power makes me unrivaled and all that jazz, then how are you dead? You know, 'cause you had the same power and all. That caused Shigaraki to frown. His eyes narrowed, his expression becoming angered. It made Luz flinch, even if it wasn't directed at her specifically. Rather, it seemed to be more directed at himself more than anything. I made a mistake. A foolish error. I created the power required for me to meet my end. But, that power does not exist here. It exists in another world, and potentially another separate from that one, but that's for a different conversation. The way he spoke with such finality only served to make Luz a little uncomfortable. And when she was uncomfortable, she was bound to say something stupid. Case in point, are you some sort of demon? Luz blurted out as Shigaraki blinked, his expression becoming one of befuddlement, until finally after a moment of awkward silence, he laughed. And it wasn't just any kind of laugh. It was a full-on, red-faced, die-laughing kind of laugh. As if what she had just said had been the funniest thing he had ever heard. It caused her to let out a silent, awkward chuckle of her own, scratching the back of her neck in such a way that made it obvious that she was uncomfortable, not that he noticed. Oh. Now that is something I've heard plenty of times. Shigaraki said as he stopped laughing, wiping a tear from his eye, calming himself. But sadly no. I am, or was, just as human as you are, Luz. He bit his lip for a moment, stopping himself from saying something. Almost as if he was withholding information. He seemed to mull it over before he opened his mouth to continue. Should we have been alive at the same time, which the more I think about it could be more possible than I once believed when I first laid eyes upon you, would be the universes in which we inhabit, or in my case, inhabited. Once again, Luz was riddled with confusion as her mind flooded with questions. What the heck did he mean by, the universes in which we inhabit? Was he referring to the multiverse? Before she could ask her question, Shigaraki spoke up. Tell me, Luz. Have you ever heard of the multiverse theory? Luz pursed her lips in a frown, squinting ever so slightly. Sure, she had heard about the theory, but it was never explained to her. Not that she particularly cared about it, but it used to be a topic she used to think about from time to time. Kinda. Luz began, scratching the back of her neck for what felt like the umpteenth time. I mean, I know of it, and people have talked about it around me, but I don't know all the details. Interesting, Shigaraki continued, a sly smirk taking up his visage. What if I told you it does exist? What if I told you I had proof of its existence? And while I can't physically show it to you due to my current state of being, I can eventually show you. If that were to be the case, would you believe me? Probably not, Luz answered abruptly as Shigaraki frowned. Would you care to indulge me then, for a moment, so that I may explain to you why I think that the multiverse exists? This is related, I assure you, Shigaraki said, before glancing around himself, as if he were checking for something. When his eyebrows knit together and a scowl took up his visage, he sighed. Well, I'll have to make it short. But, if I told you there existed a bridge-like dimension that essentially gave someone a way to leap from one world to another, and that I knew how to get there, would you believe me? The more Shigaraki spoke, the more serious his tone became. And while she didn't want to put too much thought into what he was saying, the way he said it, and considering he had been, in his own words, forthright to her the whole time, she didn't see a reason to believe that he was lying. So, with that in mind. That'd be really cool. Luz said excitedly, her eyes twinkling with wonder and amazement. So, can you show me now? To that, Shigaraki shook his head. Unfortunately, I cannot. Not in the situation and location you are in. When you return to Gravesfield, however, there will be a place where you can find what will help me prove to you that what I say is true. At least, I think so anyway. For the time being, however, we'll have to wait. But, essentially, this all comes back to the point I'm going to make. You see, you and I existed in parallel worlds. And I suspect that my death is what caused the awakening of powers, or as they were referred to in my world, quirks in your world. Once again, Luz was left stumped. Huh. I can understand your confusion. So, allow me to explain, Shigaraki began as he brought up both of his hands, the backs of them facing where Luz was, before sticking up both pointer fingers on both hands. The finger on the right is my world. The finger on the left is yours, Shigaraki started before he then outstretched both of his thumbs and made them touch. My thumbs are the aforementioned bridge dimension I spoke of. I discovered it when a close friend of mine captured a very strange, unorthodox creature in the Mizutafu prefecture of my world's Japan, and ran some tests on it. We found that its BLD contained some kind of quirk factor or something that our medical equipment picked up as a quirk factor, that allowed for dimensional travel. Quirk factor? Luz questioned as Shigaraki cleared his throat. Essentially DNA that links one's quirk, such as yours, to yourself. Science mumbo-jumbo, Shigaraki said as Luz muttered an "oh" under her breath as he continued. We were able to extract a decent amount of the creature's BLD before someone broke into our labs undetected and stole the creature away from us. Though by that point it had been well over a few years and it had grown to quite the size and had quite the temperament. Not helped by the countless amounts of drags he had used to keep it mindless so it wouldn't lash out and attack. However, as I quickly learned when visiting that bridge dimension, what was years for me, was more like days for them. I was only fairly young, only being around 50 years old at the time, but... You call being 50 young? Luz exclaimed, earning a chuckle out of Shigaraki. Well, considering I was well over 80 years old when I died, 50 is young in comparison. As to how I was able to achieve such an age, we'll get to that when I explain your power, Shigaraki continued as he cleared his throat once again. Now, as I was saying, with the BLD I had at my disposal, and with the known location of where I could access this world being pinpointed to a rundown, abandoned school building, I used the BLD to bridge a connection to that world, which then, in turn, allowed me to have access to your world by extension, despite me not ever going to it. What did you do in that world? Luz asked as Shigaraki shook his head. Not important right now. If you want to learn at a later date, I'll oblige you. For now, though, let's stay on topic, Shigaraki said, as a frown took up his visage. Besides, we're running low on time. So I need to make this quick. But, I thought you said we had plenty of time. Luz said as Shigaraki grunted, crossing his arms. We would had someone in the waking world not been trying to wake you up. This place, the vestige world, is a dreamscape. The longer you are asleep, the more time we have to converse. But, the moment someone starts to wake you up, a timer is put on us. We now only have 5 minutes left before your brain realizes something is going on in the waking world, and requires you to be awake. Oh. Oh, indeed. So then, because I had died, and because your world was on the verge of something fantastical happening, it would seem as if the universe took it upon itself to grant your world the same gift mine had in store for my universe well over 200 years ago. The gift of quirks. And your quirk, Luz, is something that I like to call a failsafe. And for someone like yourself, it is quite a fitting one. Especially given what I know of you and your struggles. A very apt power if I say so myself. A part of Luz was beginning to get wary of what Shigaraki was implying. Calling her power a failsafe made it sound like her power had some kind of responsibility. And while Luz wasn't exactly one to dislike responsibility, all she wanted to do was live freely. Not be chained down by obligations or be forced to do things that she didn't want to do. It went entirely against her mentality. It went against everything she stood for as a person. It suddenly made her less excited to know about what her power was. Especially if it came with something as crappy as responsibility. Although, it wasn't as if she had to hold herself to that responsibility. Besides, if there was anything she learned about in school, it was that you could delay something until the last minute and still come out on top by making the best essay known to man 1 hour before it was due. Was it optimal? Probably not. But hey! She hadn't been let down by that strategy yet. And with that in mind, she couldn't help but get excited. Finally, she'd get some clarity about her power, quirk, or whatever the heck these palm holes were supposed to be. So, what is it? What's my power? Luz asked, slight impatience in her voice as she spoke. And then, Shigaraki smiled. It was the kind of smile that only true-blooded villains could have. The wide smile of someone who had been bottling up something nefarious for quite some time. The kind of smile that one would WHP out when a well-laid plan was coming together perfectly. A part of Luz immediately felt off when she looked at Shigaraki. And then, he spoke. You see, Luz, the power that you possess, the power that was once mine and allowed me to dominate my world single-handedly, and the power that will pave your way to glory is known as All for One. As for what it can do, well, you were close when you said that you believed your power could copy the quirks of those whom you came into physical contact with. But you were still wrong. No. All for One allows the user to steal other people's powers, and make them yours. It can also, assuming you have powers already stored within you, give others powers. But then, why on earth would you want to give away something that is meant to be yours? Not unless you were getting something out of it, of course. And as Shigaraki finished his explanation of what Luz's power was, of what All for One was, she felt a pit in her stomach grow. Her power, the one that awakened upon the death of Shigaraki, was a power that allowed her to steal away someone's gift. Essentially, it allowed her to steal away the very thing that makes someone unique. That's. Luz began, as she looked down at the palms of her hands. Now, the holes in her palms suddenly had a less appealing look to them. Suddenly, the holes in her palms looked like nothing but something to be ashamed of. She was a leech. A parasite. Her power was to take stuff that didn't belong to her. That's awful. It's wrong. It's horrible. Why the hell would I ever do that to someone? And all Shigaraki could do was laugh. For what reason, she didn't know. After a moment, he spoke. Oh, how that brings me back. Back to the days when my younger brother was alive. He used to tell me the same thing. But, that's in the past. He's been dead for a long time, and while your little outburst reminded me of him, allow me to let you in on a little secret about quirks, Shigaraki said, his expression one of nonchalance, before it quickly fell into an emotionless mask. They're a reflection of the person who awakens them. Huh? You heard me. If you really found stealing power from others to be as underhanded and as awful as you proclaim, then would it have not made sense for you to awaken some other kind of power? Yet, you awoke to mine, so what does that say about you? Shigaraki said as Luz narrowed her eyes at him, a hint of fury dancing behind them. Are you trying to get at something here, or are you just trying to PSS me off? Luz spat as Shigaraki smirked. I'll let you decide that. After all, we're running out of time. There's only a few more seconds before you wake up. So, I'll leave you with this. When someone is pushed down by society. When someone is hurt and constantly trampled on by the world around them. It only makes sense for that person to longing a fraction of that power that is actively being used to hurt them, even if they themselves must do things that they would otherwise consider immoral. As soon as those words exited his mouth, the world became a starch white, and the corners of her eyes became filled with a bright, blinding light. The last thought she had when she was forced out of the vestige world was one of reflection. What did I just get myself into? 2 days. It had been 2 agonizing, horrible days since the news broke out that Camila learned that her precious daughter was in trouble. In those 3 days, she had not turned up to work and had emptied every single bottle of alcohol in the house trying, and failing, to drink away all of her problems. And no better did anything else reflect that than the state of the house. Dirty glasses lined the table and the counters. Empty bottles knocked over with dried-up spills staining parts of the tile floor. For some reason or another, there was a fist-sized hole in the wall, and there was a pile of laundry that had yet to be done. The upstairs was untouched, Camila not even so much as wanting to look in the direction of Luz's room, namely because if she did she'd feel another wave of guilt. This whole situation had been nothing but awful. She had gotten next to no sleep, and when she woke up, she'd feel like CRP due to being extremely hungover. Her phone had blown up with calls and emails, though she had never once bothered to look at them. Camila wanted nothing to do with the world at the moment. The only thing she wanted to do was sit in and wallow in the fact that her daughter was gone. Disappeared. Vanished with no signs of returning. She hadn't even bothered to turn on the TV to check the news, that was how bad it had gotten. Maybe it was a bit of an overreaction on her part, but even if that was the case, that wasn't how it felt for her. To Camila, it felt like the whole world had flipped upside down. She should have just kept her home. She should have never signed her up for that camp. If she hadn't done that, none of this would have happened. Luz would be home, safe, and away from whatever hell she got roped into. And what was worse was that she finally got an idea of what it was that she had said to Luz the day before she was sent off to camp. It was something so awful she dared not repeat it. What was worse was that she had no idea why she had said it. She didn't know the context, not that there was any context to be needed for saying such a horrible thing, and now Luz was gone, disappeared into the wind, taken somewhere most likely horrible. Scenarios ran through her head, each darker than the last. There was a known child trafficking ring in the southern United States for labor and other horrible things. The mere thought that Luz was wrapped up in such a thing. There was a sudden knock at her front door, causing the hungover Camila to stir from her spot on the couch. She was dressed in a loose-fitting shirt and a pair of shorts. She looked disheveled, with bags under her eyes and lines on her forehead from stress. There were even a few gray hairs starting to form. She was in no state to be visited right now, so who could that have been? Slowly, Camila got up from the couch and walked to the door, groggily wiping at her eyes, dry tear stains on her cheeks. There was another knock at her door, prompting her to mumble, "I'm coming," under her breath. When she finally got to the door, she opened it and was greeted by someone whom she hadn't seen in just a little over a month. He was a little shorter than her, with silver gray hair, a clean-shaven face, and wrinkled skin. His eyes were a piercing blue, but they contained a softness in them that was typical of him. Rather than having been dressed in what she had typically seen him in, the man was dressed in a white short-sleeve shirt, and a pair of blue pants with black dress shoes. He had a cane in his right hand, signifying that his back pain might have been acting up again. Something that Camila had known about due to how often they used to talk. And while it had been a while since they had seen each other, she knew exactly who that old man was. She blinked, staring at him with a confused look in her eyes. "Pastor? What are you doing here?" "Ah, Camila, it's good to finally see you again," Domenico said, looking her up and down, his expression dipping into one of worry. "I see that you are not taking this very well, are you?" "Not that I blame you, of course." Domenico looked over her shoulder, his frown deepening. "Would you mind if I came inside? There is something I wanted to talk to you about. It's concerning the mess of a situation we're currently finding ourselves in." Sure, come on in," Camila said, unlocking the screen door as she stepped away. Domenico walked through the entrance as she took a step back, moving first with his cane then the rest of himself. Once he got into the house, he gently closed the doors behind him, before gesturing her to follow him to the table. He cleared off the bottles and took a seat for himself, Camila sitting in front of him, her expression somber, as to be expected. For a moment, they sat in silence, until finally Domenico spoke up. "Whatever it is you're thinking about doing, Camila, I want you to stop." "I'm not thinking about anything," Camila retorted, a slight edge to her voice as Domenico sighed. "I know that look in your eye, Camila. Need I remind you when you spoke to me about that particular incident when you were 17? The one where I held a private confessional for you?" Domenico said, causing Camila to flinch. That was a dark time in her life, one she didn't think about too often for very good reason. It was when she first moved to America from the Dominican Republic with her mother. It was a time when her family had to rely on the church. A time when they could barely get by and afford food. A time when Camila had lost so much weight that she was borderline anorexic and considering doing the unthinkable. It was also when Domenico took over as the pastor at St. Peter's Liturgical Church. When he intervened and donated 3 months' worth of food collected from the community to their home. She had owed Domenico more than what she was worth in money for that. He would never accept any payment. After all, as he would put it, "I'm just doing the Lord's work" or something like that. That was the kind of person Domenico was. "Camila. It isn't your fault, you know." "None of this was your fault," Domenico said as Camila looked away, shame on her face. "I was the one who put her on that bus. I might as well have pulled the trigger." Camila replied as Domenico shook his head, sighing. "No, Camila. You did nothing wrong here. You signed Luz up for that camp thinking it would be safe. There was nothing you could have done to prevent what had happened. Whoever kidnapped Luz and the other children will pay for this. The FBI and the police are looking into this as we speak. They will capture whoever did this." But nothing, Camila," Domenico interrupted, frowning. He then placed one hand over one of hers, his frown turning into a smile. "Do you believe in your daughter? And wasn't that the question of the year?" Honestly, she should have immediately responded with yes. But something in her was stopping her from saying that she did. Maybe it was because she knew how Luz liked to deal with problems, and that was staying silent about them. Not talking about it and bottling up the trouble, just like her father had. Knowing Luz, and knowing the type of person she was going to do something stupid. She was going to say something or act out in some way, and it would result in her getting hurt or worse. And the thought of that broke Camila's heart. Camila faltered, biting her lip. "Of course I do. I just worry she'll do something and make the situation worse." Domenico finished her sentence, his tone inquisitive as Camila flinched. "It's not wrong to think that. Your daughter is quite the troublemaker. But then again, a town needs a troublemaker to have it feel complete. Gravesfield would be a husk without one. A soft chuckle escaped under Domenico's breath as he spoke, Camilla glancing back at him, a tired gleam in her eyes. Camilla didn't understand Domenico. He could always see the good in any situation, no matter how horrible had the chance of going. Maybe it was because he was just that carefree. It was strange, but then again, a lot of things were strange. And in such uncertain times, with people changing rapidly at a constant rate, that kind of thing was sorely needed. Camilla began, closing her eyes tightly. I know I haven't been to church lately, and it's because your faith is waning, am I correct? Domenico asked as Camilla's expression tightened. It was like he could read her mind, and it was clear that her expression gave it away as he hummed in thought. Well, if it is, then so be it. Who am I to try and convince you to keep your faith? Waning faith or not, that does not mean I cannot be there for you and your family. What servant of God would I be if I didn't? There was comfort in knowing that, and she was glad for it. Glad that at least someone wasn't abandoning her. She tried getting in contact with her ex-sister-in-law, but when she answered, she was told to never call this phone line again before hanging up. Her mother also wouldn't pick up, no matter how many times she rang. The last time they spoke, they left on bad terms. She couldn't remember the full conversation, but she did recall there being booze involved. That was a pattern. Her and her dependency on alcohol. It had shattered her relationship with her mother, and was now slowly breaking apart her relationship with her daughter. And now, she didn't even know if her daughter was still alive. Camilla, Domenico's voice speaking her name broke her out of her thoughts, concern on his face as she looked up to stare at him, eyes still heavy from a lack of sleep, her head hurting from the searing hungover migraine. Tomorrow, I would like you to come to church. Pastor, Not for the service, Camilla. Last we talked you had said you wanted to stay away from the church due to recent events. I am not asking you to come because of that. It's for something else, Domenico interrupted as Camilla shifted in her seat, crossing her arms as he continued. I doubt you've seen the news, but all the media channels have stopped talking about the kidnapping. The only reason why I know that the FBI and the police are still looking into this is because of our very own police chief sheriff Johnson. You mean the racist, bigoted, white supremacist piece of trash Martin Johnson? Camilla spat venom in her voice as thick as syrup. She loathed that man. More so than that nutcase Jacob Hopkins. The DMN conspiracy theorist. Both he and Martin shared the same views when it came to race and sexuality, and it plagued this town. Great replacement, this, the LGBT mind virus, and wokeness taking over media, that. It was all lunacy. It was a mockery of conservatism. Back in the early 90s and 2000s, she voted for the Republican Party due to her views aligning with theirs. And while some policies she wasn't exactly for, others she had been. But now, in the last 10 years, ever since Barack Obama was elected in 2008, it had become strikingly clear that the Republican Party had fallen from their previous status as the everyman's party, and went to the nationalist party. Hell, some would even say they were a Christian nationalist party. And with Donald Trump currently making a mockery of the presidency. She honestly didn't know why she had ever voted Republican in the first place. Since 2008 she had started voting Democrat, mostly out of spite for what the Republican Party had become. Though that was a tangent for another time. The point was, those two nutcases, Martin and Jacob, were utter disgraces to the movement they claimed to be with. They claimed one way, acted another, and made themselves and those that called them friends and family look like utter morons due to sticking by their side. Heedless of the words they spew and the hate that they utter. Then again, what was she supposed to expect from the two people who regularly attended marches and rallies with neo-Nazis? Domenico frowned, stroking his chin as he groaned. Yes, unfortunately. But, he's at least dedicated to his job. Not to mention his nephew is wrapped up in this as well, so there's no reason to believe that he won't drop it just because of the others. If there's one thing that man cares about, it's his family. Even if he's more than a little bit of a sleazeball. We can agree on that, Camila scoffed, before blinking. She had been a little distracted by the mention of Martin that she had completely missed the fact that the news channels weren't covering the kidnappings, which she quickly corrected. What was that about the news not covering the kidnappings? Domenico fidgeted in his seat, clasping his hands together in his lap as he nodded solemnly. I was wondering when you would pick up on that. But, in short, the news stations are not covering the topic anymore. Someone, or some group, has more than likely paid them off to cease discussion of it. As a matter of fact, articles online are calling it a hoax. And not just fringe political websites, we're talking Fox News, MSNBC, and even CNN. But it's not a hoax. Camila all but roared, shooting up from the table as Domenico scowled, not at her mind you, not at her, he had no reason to, but at the situation at large. You of all people would know that. You're a victim in this, as are many other parents. Many other parents I just so happen to be in contact with. I reached out to them, knowing full well that they more than likely needed an outlet to talk to. Most churches statewide have closed due to the outbreak of demonic activity, or what have you, i.e. power awakenings. I'm fairly certain that, aside from my church, Greg Abbott's mega church, and the Whitbane Congregational Church Association and all of their various mega churches across the country, every other place is shut down, Domenico began, his jaw set as he glanced around the house. You see, Camila. I believe that something is going on here. If it wasn't obvious, someone or some group is trying to sweep this under the rug. If I had to guess, it's someone who would benefit from seeing those children go missing and turn up dead. And if I were to further continue my assumption, I believe this could potentially be the work of the Witch Hunters Association. Camila blinked, confusion painting her face. The what? I don't suspect you've heard of them. But, they're a ragtag group of very wealthy, very elite individuals who are high up in society. The Witch Hunters Association used to exist in the early 1600s, back when all of that fantastical nonsense was believed. In the mid-1770s, when America broke off from the British Empire, they were all enlisted into the war, and then promptly dissolved after America won, Domenico explained, leaning in his chair, Camila listening intently, although she was confused about one tiny, little thing. So, what does this have to do with what's going on now? Camila asked as Domenico hummed. And you're right to ask that. And so, I shall answer. Would you believe me if I said that this wasn't the first time that superpowers were beginning to show themselves? As those words left Domenico's mouth, Camila recoiled in shock. Huh. I know, right? I hardly believed it myself. But that's when I met 26-year-old Amy Thatcher. She's the mother of one of the children who had been kidnapped, 12-year-old Arla. And yes, I did the math. It's as bad of a situation as it sounds, Domenico said as Camila shook her head, total bewilderment in her eyes as Domenico continued. In 2008, when Amy was pregnant with Arla, she awoke one morning with the ability to repair whatever object she had touched. She even showed me proof by repairing the broken organ at the church. But how? Why didn't it blow up like it has now? The Witch Hunters Association. They rounded up all of the superpowered kids and killed them before the media could catch on. And besides, it was only a localized awakening in Kentucky, and not anywhere else in America. As for how Amy is still alive, she was only spared because she was pregnant. She had to use her unborn baby as a shield to defend herself. The WHA people took pity on her, expecting her to die in childbirth like most teen parents do. She didn't, and she's the only surviving member of the superpowered kids in her generation, Domenico answered, causing Camila to pale in disgust. And, what about the rest of the world? Camila asked, though having already known the answer given how this conversation was going. I don't know. But, if I were to guess. All round up and killed by the WHO, which, mind you, is a worldwide organization. It is not limited to our country. Not that it truly matters for us, what matters is what's happening here. And I know exactly who founded the WHA. It took some digging, but I was able to figure it out due to his family's history, Domenico said, as he pulled out a folded-up sheet of paper from his pants pocket. He placed it on the table, unfolding it, before turning it to Camila, which she read out loud. Witch Hunters Association founder. Tyler Whitbane. Camila muttered, looking at the photo of the man in question. Dark brown ear-length hair, golden yellow eyes, and pale skin. Sunken cheeks and stubble on his chin. I mean, it's horrible, but, what does this have to do with me? Aside from him obviously being the one who more than likely kidnapped Mija. Domenico took back the piece of paper and put it in his pocket, leveling a glance at Camila, his expression unreadable. You see, Camila. I plan to take this battle directly to him. My accusations, and my evidence. I have it all gathered and prepared. I'll be delivering it to the court system and filing a collective joint lawsuit. One signed by every single parent who has been affected. I wanted to add your signature to it. What do you say? Luz. A voice Luz recognized as belonging to Julia called out, breaking her out of her groggy half-sleep. Her eyes were heavy with the same kind of feeling that someone who had just woken up had, a tired groan sighing from her as she cupped her forehead. The headache from earlier was gone, thankfully, though now it was replaced with a heavy weight on her shoulders. All for one, the power to steal away others' powers. Luz thought, a frown taking up her visage, only for it to disappear a moment later when a hand grasped her shoulder. It was Julia's, that much was obvious, given how it had been her voice that had woken her up from her sleep. Julia. Luz muttered, turning her whole body to face the girl in question, who looked down at her with worry written all over her face. Are you okay? Julia asked as Luz raised an eyebrow. I mean, aside from not wanting to be here, I'd say I'm fine. Why? Luz asked as Julia breathed out a sigh of relief. But, why? What was she so relieved about? Well, when I came to check on you, you were, what was the term again, sweating buckets? Yes, I believe that was the saying. And when I touched your forehead, you had a blazing fever. To the point where I almost believed you were going to go into shock from how hot you were getting, Julia answered as Luz blinked. That wasn't good. It also didn't make sense. She was fit as a fiddle when she woke up the day of her getting on that bus. So why or how on earth did that change? Not to mention she didn't feel sick. Not even remotely. Was it a consequence of speaking to Shigaraki or being inside that vestige realm or whatever it was called? Luz frowned. This was all too confusing for her to deal with after the massive bombshell that was dropped on her by her less-than-a-friend mental pal. It was clear that whoever Shigaraki Rikitasu was before he died was nothing but trouble, and should be avoided at all costs. If it can be helped, obviously. If she couldn't avoid him, then she'd deal with it. She found herself still staring at the palm of her right hand, glaring at the hole in the center with nothing but aggravation and annoyance. Theft. Stealing. That was her power. She stole from others the power of which was rightfully theirs. The jokes wrote themselves, and while she knew it was wrong, there was a voice in the back of her head, tiny as could be, whispering to her. It wasn't Shigaraki's voice. It wasn't a mysterious third party, either. It was her voice. And it was telling her to indulge. To take without consequence. No. Luz thought, clenching her hand into a fist, covering the hole with her fingers, her nails digging into her palm as her frown slowly morphed into a toothless sneer. She glanced up at Julia, who was still staring at her with worry written all over her face. A string, barely even visible, marked itself right between Julia's eyes. It sparked with red lightning, like a tempting offer. Her left hand twitched, small, barely noticeable sparks jumping to and from her hand and fingers as the voice of her subconscious began to speak. Go on, do it. You know you want to. Why not? Who's going to stop you? The world is your oyster, so goes the quote, right? Why not indulge a little? Take what's yours. You're the one in charge. You're the one with the control. For once in your life, be a little greedy. What's the worst that can happen? For a moment, her hand rose an inch off of the bed, but she stopped herself. No. Luz thought, this time with more defiance in her mental tone. I won't do it. I can't do it. Mama raised me better than that. The voice had no response. Just pure, utter silence. Well, that was until Julia spoke up again. Luz. Are you alright? Huh? Luz snapped back to the world around her, blinking rapidly as the string disappeared. She looked up at Julia, meeting her eyes, before a blush of embarrassment washed over her cheeks, a nervous chuckle following after it. Hee hee, sorry about that. Just spaced out, that's all. Well, if that's all, Julia said, a heavy dose of skepticism in her voice. She sat next to Luz, hands flat against her knees as the two stared at the wall. There was a heavy silence between them, and as Luz glanced outside, seeing the veil of darkness begin to coat the ground outside, she realized just how long she had been asleep. Well, it wasn't exactly a lie to say she had been asleep. She certainly felt rejuvenated, but the heavy weight of the revelation of what her powers made it almost feel pointless. What made it worse was that it finally had begun to sink in that all of this, was real. Oh, sure, she had acknowledged that fact earlier, but now she was truly coming to grips with it. Luz had hoped, with all of her heart, that this was just one big bad lucid dream. Or, well, a nightmare would be more apt to describe the shitshow she was in, though that was just semantics. She wanted this to be fake, desperately so. She wanted to have woken up, back home, in her bed, in the comfort of her home with her mama making her favorite food and continue binge-watching The Legend of Korra. She had just finished watching The Good Witch Azura, the animated show, for the 15th time that year, so she decided to spice things up, while knowing she had the whole summer to make more AMVs and read more books. But now that she sat there, staring at the cabin wall, Luz realized that this wasn't just a big, fake, lucid nightmare. This was her reality. Her fate, as Shigaraki had put it. She was destined to be put into this situation, or worse. This was what she was going to be subjected to. And it opened up the possibility of a very mortifying thought. I'm going to die here. Luz muttered, earning a sharp stare from Julia. No, you won't, Julia stated in a matter-of-fact tone, causing Luz to glance at her, her eyes narrowing slightly. At least you have something to defend yourself with. What do I have? These useless hands that do nothing, Luz grumbled as Julia crossed her arms, giving her the typical, "Are you kidding me?" stare that her mother would often give her when she did something, admittedly, stupid. Although hidden in that stare, there was an accusatory gleam in her eyes, something that Luz picked up on. You're lying, Julia stated, leaving no room for argument. Luz was about to say something, but Julia continued. I know you're lying because I'm the queen of lies. I had to be to get stuff around my father. You looked at the floor for just a moment, so therefore, you're lying. And how do you know, huh? Luz spat, as Julia smirked. Because you just confirmed it, and with that, Luz realized that she had fallen for the good old bait and SWCH. She should have seen that coming, but she didn't. Blame her social unawareness of cues like that, but it wasn't all that wrong for her to get defensive. No one liked being told that they were lying, even if they knew deep down that they were. Luz brought her arms up to rest on her legs, her elbows sitting on her thighs as she uncurled her right hand, making both of them face her palm up. She looked at her hands, her palms specifically, and regarded them with disgust. Before, she used to look at her newfound palm holes with intrigue. With curiosity. With joy. Her one major fantasy, the one where she received a superpower, came true. Where she could be the hero of her own story and save people from themselves and others. To bring about world peace at a time when it was needed most. Basically, she wanted to be like Azura. She finally had something, even if it was a little confusing and something she was having a strong time figuring out, to do that with. And what was better was that others were awakening powers like her. She could have cool, awesome battles that she's always envisioned to have. It was her dream come true. And then she met Shigaraki. She learned the truth about her power, about where it came from. She learnt that it was, in fact, not that. It was something that embodied the very thing she despised. The taking away of someone's individuality given manifest. Greed incarnate. Something that she had no business being linked to. But yet, if that was the case, if that was true, why had Shigaraki said what he had said? Was he just trying to manipulate her? Or was he telling the truth? They're a reflection of the person who awakens them. If you really found stealing power from others to be as underhanded and as awful as you proclaim, then would it have not made sense for you to awaken some other kind of power? Those words stuck with her. If what he was saying had been true. If quirks, as he had called them, reflected the person that they awoke in, then why would she, someone who was entirely against taking away things from others for the basis of just because, then why would she awaken to a power that sole purpose was to do that? Was it a cruel joke on behalf of the world? Or was it something else? She would admit to herself, and herself alone, that there was 1 or 2 times where she would have fantasies. Violent fantasies. Where she'd corner someone who had been bullying her for years on end and making them bite the curb. Stomp their head and revel in their pain. It was a part of her she utterly loathed. She hated that she had those kinds of fantasies. She never told her mama about them, out of fear of scorn. But it was the truth. All of her life she had been trampled on and mocked for her likes and beliefs. She had been made to be the school punching bag and made to endure things no student should have to face. Granted, worse could have happened to her, but she'd rather not think about that. On days she'd get violently angry, she blamed her ADHD for that one, she'd find herself acting out those scenarios in the basement of her house. Using piles of clothing for that express purpose. Imprinting those who had wronged her on them and doing something of the most vile acts to them. It was all imaginary. All fake. None of it was real, so she was allowed to go all out. Of course, she feared the day where one of those times she'd do it for real. Where one day, someone would do something that would make her snap. There was only one time when she almost caved. It was a girl named Amber. She remembered the whole scene like the back of her hand. Amber had been pestering her, as had been the usual. There was never a day when that didn't happen. But she had said something. Something she dared not repeat. Something about her father. And that was something no one did. That day, Luz had brought a knife to school. Why? She didn't know. She just picked it up off the table and slid it into her pocket. It was one of those pick up and fiddle with moments she had. She had forgotten it in her pocket and was far too afraid to call her mom about what happened. Especially because the school police officer had a special kind of dislike for her kind, as he put it. Had she not stopped herself from turning around and lodging the knife in her pocket into Amber's throat, she most likely would have been in prison. She wanted nothing more than to kill Amber. For what she had said about her father. For all the trouble she had been causing. Hell, she was fairly certain it was her who had spread the rumors about Luz sleeping with Mr. Jones. It could have all ended. Right there and then. But, then she would have been caught, and there would have been no point. So, she decided against it. Besides, there would be no point in killing someone for doing something so petty. If she had any reason to kill someone, it would be for a DMN good one, not just a petty insult directed toward her dead dad. Still, it was around that time that she realized something had been wrong with her. Rather than confront it, though, she bottled it up, just like she had with everything else. Maybe that was why she had awakened such a horrid power. Because she refused to speak about her problems and kept them to herself. But then, how did that translate into having a power as greedy as one like All for One? It made no sense, and it confused her more than anything else. It wasn't as if she had any prior longing to steal things from others. Although, she had wished in the past to take everything from those that had wronged her. Just as a way to point and laugh at them. That might have had something to do with it. Of course, there was always the chance that he was manipulating her. And, considering the kind of vibe that he gave off, that was more than possible. But, on the off chance that he wasn't doing that. That he was being honest. Then she had to take his words to heart. Regardless of what she wanted to be true. Even if Shigaraki was lying to her, it could be a white lie. And a white lie was often far worse than a normal lie. Because a white lie contained just enough truth to deceive the person being lied to. She thanked having her binged Death Note for that one. And that, most of all, made him that much more terrifying. The fact that he could so effortlessly lie and tell the truth at the same time was horrifying. And that wasn't even considering the presence he drew in. Just knowing him for a few minutes left her with the impression that the man she was speaking to was nothing short of a MSTR manipulator and genius. When he spoke, he commanded respect. He commanded fear. He commanded obedience. And he was in her head. Rikitasu Shigaraki, a man who supposedly conquered his world, was now living inside her head. Someone who she had no doubt in her mind was a bona fide supervillain. A monster beyond compare. And now, not only was he in her head, but she had his superpower. She had become a wielder of All for One. A power that could take other people's powers. A power that was greed incarnate. A power that reflected its user, but did it really? Was he telling the truth? Or was he lying to her? The fact that she couldn't tell if she was being lied to scared her. She was really good at piecing together that type of thing. So for her to be unable to tell was a feat in of itself. And if Shigaraki was honest about that, what else was he not lying about? Or better yet, how much of his words had been whole truths? It started to make Luz panic a little bit because now she was on a deadline. She didn't want to hurt anyone. She refused to hurt others. It was wrong, even if there were a few times where she had so badly wanted to. Luz wanted to discount everything that Shigaraki had told her. She wanted to throw away every word that he had spoken and forget their meeting ever happened. But logic demanded that she heeded his words. If what he said was true, then she might have been in for a rude awakening very soon. She had no idea how close soon was. For all she knew it was a few days away, or if that was only moments away. Hell, it could have been right now and she wouldn't have been any the wiser. Luz. Are you alright? It was Julia's voice that snapped Luz out of her thoughts yet again, a frown on her face. You spaced out again. Luz, tell me what's wrong. Luz blinked, her dark brown eyes meeting Julia's golden yellow. She wanted to tell her the truth. Really, she did, but what would her reaction be? To learn that her friend, someone that she trusted, had the power to take away the very thing that was hers. All with just a handshake. It would paint all of their previous interactions in a bad light. And the last thing that she wanted to do was to drive a wedge into their budding friendship. So, against her better judgment, she lied. No, I'm alright. Let's just get this party started, yeah. Luz said as Julia arched an eyebrow, her frown deepening as she crossed her arms. Luz. You just about had a slide, Julia said, her tone of voice dripping with worry and concern. I don't know what happened, but you need to see a doctor, or... What doctor, Julie? Luz interrupted, her voice deadpan as she stood up, dusting off her leggings as she looked over her shoulder and back at Julia. There's no doctor in this camp, and no, Arla doesn't count. Besides, I doubt the governor is gonna send one because one of us got sick. Hell, he's hoping for us to die here anyway, so what does it matter? Luz said, her tone cold as Julia looked away. I'm sorry. I shouldn't have said anything. Julia muttered, causing Luz's features to soften. Why had she said it like that? Sure, she was in a bad mood, but Julia was the last person who needed to be on the other end of it. No, Julia. Luz said, shaking her head. I should be the one who's sorry. I shouldn't have snapped at you. I'm in a bit of a bad mood right now, and I shouldn't have taken it out on you. Silently, Julia nodded, her expression one of understanding, if not a little on the upset side. She couldn't blame Julia for that. Not one bit. How about this, I'll gather everyone and I'll finally tell the truth about my power, okay? Alright, Julia said under her breath, standing up next to Luz before looking her over one more time. But Luz, please, if you need someone to talk to about something, I'm willing to listen. After all, my old friends used to tell me I was an amazing listener. As Julia said that, Luz couldn't help but smile. What did she do to deserve suddenly getting a friend like Julia? Maybe this was the universe's way of counterbalancing all the toxicity that she had encountered in her life. If that was the case, then she would be more than glad about it. However, there was something in the back of her mind telling her to not get too attached. The situation they were in, it was obvious that something bad was going to happen. But, she'd like to think that no one would take any of the bait that the governor would put out. She had confidence that, given enough time, they could all work together to revolt against the governor. Especially if there were people like Arla and Stanley around. Do you think you can gather everyone else, Julia? Luz asked as Julia nodded, stepping out of the cabin. Luz breathed out, calming herself as closed her eyes. Come on, Luz. You can do this. As soon as that thought ended, an idea formed in her mind. On top of revealing what her power was, she was going to divide people into groups. The groups would be simple, and also small. It kind of had to be, especially given how many people she had to work with. But, if there was something that Luz was semi-good at, it was strategy. Those 1,500 hours of command and conquer were going to come in handy, it seemed. And while she wished the circumstances behind it were better, it was better than nothing. Exiting the cabin, Luz saw her fellow prisoners, all of whom were sitting by the fireplace. A nervous sigh escaped her lips before she approached the group of now 10 people, including Julia. The moment she stepped out, all eyes were on her. She had no idea how long she had been out, though considering the sun was about to go down, she must have been asleep for a while. Commander, you're here, Stanley said as he stood up, a smirk on his face as he stared at her. So, what do you have in mind? Do you have some form of game plan for tomorrow? Stanley asked as Luz scratched the back of her neck. Well, to be honest, no. Luz replied as Stanley frowned, crossing his arms. He was about to open his mouth to say something, though Luz quickly followed up her reply. But I do know what we can do right now, that seemed to appease Stanley, who shifted in place, uncrossing arms as Luz continued. The nap I had allowed me to clear my mind, and I came up with an idea for how we can operate going forward. Have any of you played Command and Conquer? My mom used to, Carla spoke up, raising an eyebrow. But, what does that have to do with us? A lot, actually, Luz quipped, a smile slowly taking up her visage. You see, for those who haven't played, as the commander, you can group up people and have them do specific things. Can anyone guess what I'm trying to do? It was then that Marconi's eyes widened, and as soon as they did, he chuckled, before flashing a toothy grin. Good idea, Signorina Comandante. A few seconds later, his grin turned into a look of confusion, as he stroked his chin in thought. However, how can you group us into, well, groups, without knowing our capabilities? Sure, you know our names and powers, but none of us know how to fight, supposedly, and we're all just a bunch of kids. We have no survival skills outside of maybe Stanley. He had a point, unfortunately. That was another aspect of this nightmare of a game that they were being forced to play. Assuming that everyone here had no real experience in these sorts of situations. Like, fighting, survival, and all of that fun stuff, then they were all at a disadvantage. Well, don't go assuming that stuff, Johnny said, crossing his arms. I just so happen to know how to survive in the wilderness. Looks like I can put my scouting background into action. Johnny said as he smirked. And besides, with my vibrations, I can probably use it to track animals for hunting purposes. And how do you suppose that'll work? Judy asked incredulously. Haven't you only had your power for a week? 'Cause that's when these things started showing up, yeah. Huh. No, Johnny replied, tilting his head to the left. I've had my power for over a year at this point. Why yeah. And I was born with a mind, Arla added, causing Luz to blink. Wait, what? She exclaimed as Arla giggled, a smile on her face. Why yeah, it's because of my mom. She can restore things, and I guess I got a better version of it. Though, I'm not supposed to say anything about it. I guess it's okay here, seeing as we're all the same, Arla muttered, causing Luz's brain to, for all intents and purposes, shut down. How was this possible? This was supposed to be a new thing, so how did Johnny and Arla have their powers before the beginning of the week? That doesn't make any sense, though, Julia noted, crossing her arms. Superpowers have only been around for a week. If you're truly claiming that you've had yours your entire life, Arla, then that implies that this sort of thing has happened before, and there are no records of it happening prior to the beginning of this week. Well, personally, I don't trust the government to be honest about that sort of thing, Jean said, frowning, earning a skeptical gaze from Julia, which he returned in kind. What? Do you mean to tell me you believe the people who said that the reason we were in Iraq was to get rid of terror, and then tell the truth a few years later saying that they're only there for the oil? Julia went to say something, only to stop, looking away with a hint of embarrassment on her face. Yeah, that's what I thought, Jean snarked, before scoffing. I mean, if something like this has happened before, then it makes sense how the government, or at least Maxwell, was able to set something like this up rather quickly. And the reason why we never knew about whoever predated us, is because they were successful in wiping them out. The air around the campfire suddenly became heavy. If what Jean said was true, then let's not think about that right now, yeah. Luz said, nervously smiling as nods and grumbles came from around the campfire. The last thing that they needed on their minds right now was the idea that this wasn't the first time something like this had happened. So then, how are we going to do this, then? Theodore asked as Luz smirked. Well, let's start with the simplest team to sort out. A scouting party. The group of people who'll get the supply drop for our team, Luz said, before looking over at Judy. You'll be leading it, and the two other people with you will be Stanley and Arla. I, Judy replied, a smirk on her face. Stanley grunted, and Arla nodded. Next up, we've got the two lookouts. That'll be Marconi and Theodore. I'm sure you guys can find a way up on the walls, right? Luz asked as the pair nodded. Marconi grabbed a rock off the ground, before grunting, and as he did, it began to transform into a thick, rope-like vine with large, heavy-looking leaves. An exhausted sigh came out after he was done, and a bead of sweat dripped down the side of his face, which indicated he was suddenly exhausted. I can create a vine staircase out of rocks, but it drains me. Marconi said as Julia shook her head. You could just ask me to lift you up there, I can carry well over a ton of weight with my vines. Remember, the tree? Oh, right, yeah. Marconi muttered, causing Luz to raise an eyebrow in confusion. What are you talking about? Luz asked as Ronnie chuffed, looking over to Luz with a smirk on his face. A tree, for some reason, nearly toppled over the base. Guess it just got too old or something. It was gonna crush the cabin you were in, and Julia wasn't a big fan of that. So, she used her vines to grab the huge thing, and I mean, it was huge, before chucking it across the forest without so much as breaking a sweat. You shoulda seen it, it was amazing. Ronnie explained as Luz slowly turned to look at Julia, who had a sheepish smile on her face. Remind me to never get you angry, okay? Luz asked as Julia giggled. Don't worry, I doubt you could. Your face is too cute for that, Julia replied, an honest smile on her face as she closed her eyes, both of her hands clasped together and sitting front and center in front of her. As those words left her mouth, Luz's face became as red as a tomato, stammering as she tried and failed to get out a single coherent sentence. Julia opened her eyes, raising an eyebrow, confusion coating her expression as she tilted her head to the side. Luz? Are you okay? I think you broke the captain there, Jules, Stanley quipped, wrapping an arm around Luz's shoulder, which seemed to snap her out of the sputtering mess she had briefly become. Stanley unwound his arm, before slipping a hand into his pants pocket, yawning. Geez, is anyone else tired? Nah, I think I speak for everyone by saying that we're all fine, Ronnie said, followed up by a couple of nods and yes, from the others. Stanley shrugged, ruffling the back of his hair before sighing. Well, I'm gonna go to sleep. I can't keep my eyes open for much longer. Peace out, y'all. And with that, Stanley retired to one of the cabins for the night. When he fully disappeared, Luz turned to face everyone else. She looked at the remaining group of 8, not including Julia, and she frowned. She genuinely didn't know what to make of everyone else. Stanley, Judy, and Arla were perfect for being scouts. Someone with advanced movement, someone who could act as a defensive wall, and someone to heal others in case of injuries. The 2 lookouts were perfect seeing as they seemed to know the most about survival. Although, maybe she could throw Johnny on the scout team. But, what if someone came to attack the base? She didn't doubt Ronnie or Carla, nor did she doubt Julia, but what if that fire guy showed up? Suddenly, things changed, so having Johnny there to vibrate the ground out from underneath the pyro guy was a good move. What about the rest of us? Jean asked, curiosity sparkling in his eyes. Hold down the fort, basically. The less people who wander out from the base, the better. Especially because then we can watch our backs far easier when we're all grouped up. For all we know, they could have people out there scouting, looking for people to pick off. We have no idea what their mentality is, and the last thing I want to do is to go assuming things, even if I would like it for them to be against killing. That fire user seemed to be indifferent to it, Luz said as Jean nodded. Makes sense to me, Carla added, getting up from her sitting position in favor of crouching. As she did, rubbed at the back of her left car ear with the back of her hand, kind of like a cat wound when grooming itself. Arla shot her a glance, which was met by a frown and a raised eyebrow. What are you looking at? It's instinct, all right. Arla let out a tiny little geek before muttering an I'm sorry. Carla didn't seem to care and went back to her self-grooming. Luz turned around, not caring much for it. She was about to wander around, silently declaring the meeting over, but before glancing at Julia, who stared at her with a look that said, "You're not done yet." Luz honestly dreaded this part of the conversation, especially because she didn't know how anyone else would have reacted. Oh, one more thing. Stanley, get over here, this is important. Luz shouted in the direction of the cabin, as Stanley walked out, an annoyed look on his face. Thankfully, he didn't seem drowsy yet, meaning he hadn't tried falling asleep. Although, he was shirtless now, and it was more than a little attention-grabbing. She had figured that he was muscular back on the bus, not being able to see much of anything. But now she could. And while she had more of an attraction to girls than guys, to say that he wasn't attractive would have been her lying to herself. Again, not that she personally cared, she was just stating an objective fact. The saying, "a body chiseled to perfection as if it were a statue," rang true for the 18-year-old. Be it because of his power having made it that way, or if it had been from years of working out, Luz couldn't tell. He had an extremely well-defined chest and abs, broad shoulders, and a neck as thick as a log. His arms were as wide as tree trunks, too. He honestly looked like he could deadlift a whole car without so much as batting an eye. "What?" Stanley asked as Luz waved him over. She could faintly see him rolling his eyes, before lazily walking back over to the campfire. She glanced over at Judy, who had been biting her lip, looking him up and down, obviously interested in him. Stanley noticed that, too, scoffing. "What are you looking at?" "Mama likes what she sees," Judy commented, causing Luz to cringe. "If they started this CRP now. Wanna go take a walk later? I don't wanna get shot in the back of the head for breaking the rules. Remember?" Stanley noted, crossing his arms. "Also, watch it, there are little kids here, remember?" "Humph, you're not fun," Judy quipped, before smirking. "But, if I survive this, and if you do too, you're mine." Stanley seemed to shiver at that, though Luz couldn't tell if it was one of fear or one of something else. What? She wasn't exactly all tuned into that kind of thing, she was a kid. Not a horn dog. "Anyways," Luz said loud enough to break the two out of their little weird conversation, earning everyone's attention. "I finally figured out what my power is. I had some help. Not of the physical kind but of the mental kind. It came to me in my sleep, you know, like a vision." "So, what is it?" Theodore asked, hunching over slightly, like a cowboy would. Luz swallowed down the fear that was building up in her throat. This was it, if she was going to back out now, she should. But, she didn't. She wasn't going to lie to her teammates. To the people, she was supposed to lead. Unlike Maxwell, she was going to be a good leader, damn it. And so, with a relaxing exhale, Luz spoke. "My power, which I'm now calling All for One, when I come into physical contact with someone, gives me the ability to steal away other people's powers. Permanently. Oh, and if I have a stockpile of powers already, I can also give them to people," Luz explained, biting her tongue with an anxious look in her eyes after she stopped speaking. For a full minute, there was nothing but silence. Luz felt as if a million people were watching her. She didn't like it, not one bit. All she wanted to do was to hide. Hide away from everyone and everything. And that was exactly what she was about to do, until... That's incredibly useful, actually. Johnny's voice snapped her out of her near panic attack, as Luz looked up at him, a wide smirk on his face. "Think about it, Luz. You're our secret weapon. If we ever get into a fight, for any reason, with anyone from the opposing team, you can depower them and we can beat the snot out of them." "He's got a point," Stanley said, his smirk matching Johnny's. "I'll be honest, at first, I was a little iffy about joining your team instead of Kennedy's. But something told me that choosing you would let me survive this thing. Not only do you have guts, but you also have the power to back it up. We might actually win this thing, and it'll be because of you." Luz was confused. They weren't afraid of her. But why? And more to the point. "But, I don't want to win. Winning implies that we have to kill everyone else. I don't want to kill anyone," Luz said as Judy shook her head, crossing her arms. "You don't get it then," Judy stated as Luz looked over at her, eyes slightly narrowed. "What don't I get?" "That we don't have a choice," Judy responded, her tone leaving no room for argument. The sharpness and decisiveness in her voice borderline matched Shigaraki's, as did the coldness. It almost made Luz flinch, but she resisted it. She wasn't going to be intimidated by her. She couldn't be. Not when she was the leader. Leaders weren't intimidated by anyone. That was the point. We do have a choice, Luz argued, as Judy sighed. Then I guess you'll have to learn the strong way. Don't complain to me when someone's fist is elbow deep in your guts, all because you hesitated, Judy spat, tilting her head in such a way to show the disdainful look in her eyes. One that made Luz shiver. Just remember, leader or not, none of us here are loyal. We're here to survive. And if, for whatever reason, I believe you're sabotaging us all because of your own moral beliefs. She drew a line across her throat with her thumb, before a black spot appeared in front of her, as she leapt through it, but not before announcing what she was doing. I'm going on a walk. Catch you losers later. And then, just like that, Judy was gone. Ronnie sneered at where Judy had been standing, shaking his head disapprovingly. Don't listen to her, Luz. She doesn't know what she's saying. It's nothing but a bunch of empty threats. After Ronnie finished speaking, a yawn followed soon after, his eyes reflecting tiredness. Well, I'm gonna go crash. Yeah, me too. Same. My eyes are way too heavy now. Why yeah. And just like that, one by one, everyone, aside from Luz and Julia, began to walk back to the cabins. Luz was left staring at where Judy had teleported away using her spot power and frowned. She was just gone. Did that mean that she could leave the camp whenever? Or, did it have a range? If so, how small and or large was the range? She kind of wanted to try it out. You know, just to see what it would be like. And considering what she knew about her power. No, don't be stupid, Luz. She'd probably kill you if you tried, Luz thought, her frown turning into a near scowl, only stopped by Julia poking her in her cheek, making Luz snap out of her little funk. If looks could kill, that wall would be hacked to bits, Julia quipped as Luz looked away. Well, can you blame me? Did you hear what that bitch said? Luz spat, acutely aware of what word she used. But she didn't care. Her mama wasn't here to scold her, and even then, why would she care what she had to say? Especially after their last conversation. She's just stressed. Everyone here is, and stress causes people to say and do stupid things. Especially in tense situations like this one, Julia reasoned, causing Luz's shoulders to sag. She hated to admit it, but Julia was right. Right. Luz muttered, glancing in the tree line. And when she did, Luz practically paled. Why? Because standing in one of the trees was something that didn't look right. For a second, she thought she had been hallucinating. Because what she had seen wasn't human. And while it was covered in shadow due to the sun having gone down, she could make out a slug-like body. It was hanging in the tree, strange blue eyes staring her down, before quickly slinking away faster than she could blink. Luz. Julia, for what felt like the 5th time today, snapped Luz out of a daze of some kind, as the color in her face refreshed. Whatever that was, Luz didn't know. All she knew was that it was in the forest, and it wasn't human. It wasn't any animal that she had recognized. And it saw her face. What it was going to do with that information, she didn't know. And it worried her. Sorry, I just thought I saw something, Luz drawled as Julia yawned. I'm going to get some rest. I take it you're staying up. Yup, Luz replied, sticking her right thumb up with a smile on her face. I'm all energized from my nap. You can all count on me. Good, because I'm about to pass out, Julia said, stretching as she did. Then, out of nowhere, Julia wrapped her arms around Luz's torso, pulling her in, and then rested her head on Luz's shoulder. Good night, see you in the morning. And then, she pulled away, before turning to the cabins, disappearing into the doorway, leaving a confused, flustered, and blushing red Luz. Luz was never good with physical affection. Not even from her mother. So, after being willingly hugged by an admittedly extremely cute girl, it was no wonder why Luz's cheeks flared red. All Luz could do was shake her head, push down the strange feeling fluttering in her chest and ignore her fast-beating heart. She had never had a crush before. Not on anyone. But, she was fairly certain that she had a crush on Julia. A hopeful thought filled Luz's mind, that maybe, just maybe, if things all worked out. If everyone survived, and if they were able to escape this hellish nightmare, Luz could finally have someone to spend time with. Maybe, just maybe, something good could come from this hell. For days had passed since this whole game began, and if Maxwell would be honest with himself, he had half expected something to have happened. By now, no one had ventured out from their bases, aside from that Judy Valleina girl, and even then, she didn't venture that far past the Alpha Squadron's headquarters. Maxwell sighed, watching over the entire forest with his elaborate setup of hidden cameras and drones, boredom coating his features as his right fist rested on his cheek, slumping to the side as he glanced at one of the blank screens. Everyone seemed peaceful. Too peaceful. Sure, there was interior drama within the teams, more so with Foxtrot between Amelia Warstock and another member, Hilbert. Kennedy was trying to rope in Cody and stop him from blowing a fuse. That Luz girl and Judy seemed to bump heads more often than not, with Stanley having to force Judy to cool off, so to speak. Oh, and Stanley and Judy were breaking one of the rules that he had set up. The whole, no diddling allowed, rule. They thought they were clever, but they weren't. Not that he cared. They were adults, basically. It was only a problem when the younger ones decided to try and get frisky, which none of them had, thank God. He did not want to see that. He knew he was a piece of SHT, but he wasn't that much of a piece of SHT to watch kids F each other's brains out and get off to it. He wasn't like Tyler, who was a walking black hole for morality. Don't get him wrong, Tyler was his friend, that was true, but Tyler was also AF creep. Hell, he had tried to marry his daughter off to an older man. Like, 20 years older. Honestly, maybe her dying here was better than going back to that F nutcase. Not that he was going to spare any of them. This place would get carpet-bombed regardless of what the result of this little game was. Though, how he'd explain that to the public, he didn't know. Texas was smart by having theirs by their border, so they could get away with it being a defensive maneuver against Mexican invaders. And even then, Greg was dragged out from his house and lynched for doing that and was replaced by some other schmuck that he hadn't bothered to remember the name of. Besides, he only cared about the part where Greg was brutally killed like Caesar. He watched the whole thing live on TV, smiling the whole time. That BSTRD deserved it. Stole 100,000 from him and called it, claiming what he owed from a bet, which was bullshit because he had already paid that but he digressed. He wanted something to happen, damn it. Staring at the screens, watching basically nothing happened over the course of the last 120 hours was really killing the mood. The first time he and his benefactor set this whole thing up, said benefactor being Tyler, everyone went straight for each other's throats. The winner of the ordeal was a special case, too. They had tried to end him via a carpet bomb, but the BSTRD lived. When that didn't work, they tried shooting him with a firing squad, and the BSTRD responded by turning into some funky purple smoke. Then, instead of trying to do what he suggested next, that being containing him in a gas canister and dumping him in a lake, Tyler decided to hire him as a personal assassin. Then he got the idea to make an entire special forces unit out of any super freak he could get his hands on that wasn't a child or inexperienced in killing. Tyler kept mentioning how useful those with powers were. How they made detractors disappear quickly when paid enough to do it. Personally, Maxwell didn't think that way. He found them to be nothing but eyesores and blights. But, if Tyler said they were useful, then he wasn't going to knock him for his opinion. Though now, it made him wonder why Tyler would want to team up with him for a second time after what he had said. If he had seen the usefulness in them, or the lack thereof in his opinion, then why would he want to exterminate a new generation with him? Maybe there was something else to it that he wasn't understanding, but it wasn't like he cared. The only thing that Maxwell cared about was making sure that his state was safe from the heathens that were invading it. The only problem was that, unlike last time, well over 10,000 of them showed up. He had only thought a handful would CRP up like last time, but that turned out to be a lie. What was worse was that, if he didn't get this over with soon, he knew that the federal government would be on his butt. It was only a matter of time before someone noticed a whole sect of the military was taken away from their posted position. If he was found out, then his political career would be in shambles. Scratch that, it would be done for, and he'd probably spend the rest of his waking life confided in a cell. And that was assuming Tyler didn't just outright kill him after it was all said and done. The true mastermind behind this, the one who planned for and gathered everything that they needed to start this game again, was Tyler. It made sense. After all, he was the head of the Witch Hunter Association. And while it had been limited to only him and his assassins, seeing as everyone was coming out of the woodworks with superpowers now, it was only a matter of time before the number of people who joined the WHA exploded. Although, that made him wonder what would happen to those whom he cared about who woke up with superpowers. Which was hypocritical, he knew. But still, it was a genuine concern of his. Hell, even his 3-year-old son, according to his wife, woke up with the ability to sprout claws from his knuckles, like Wolverine. Oh, and his niece in New York, who had the ability to fire lasers from her eyes. She was just 6 years old. If something bad happened to her. Damn it, don't get cold feet now, Maxwell thought, setting his jaw as he sat up straight. He had already sunk time and money into this. To pull out of the operation now would surely get him killed. Regardless of what he said to Tyler. And that was assuming Tyler would be the one who did it. Times were changing, he knew that. But he didn't like those changes. Humanity wasn't meant to sprout wings from their backs. They weren't meant to blast fire from their palms. They weren't meant to turn into smoke and slip through doors and cracks in walls. What the hell is happening to the world? Maxwell thought, slumping in his chair. If someone were to have told him 20-ish years ago that those with superpowers would become commonplace, past him would tell you that he had already wiped out the super freaks with his first run of this death game he created. And while there were some exceptions he made, that smoke guy being one of them, and that one girl who he only remembered as Thatcher, it wasn't like he was going to see them again. One was with Tyler, and the other was in some backwater town in his state, probably smoking crack or something. Well, when she wasn't harassing him with emails. He never read them, so he had never really planned to interact with that slot. Although, a week ago, when he saw the name Thatcher, he nearly spat out his drink, because that was just a bit too much of a coincidence. Namely because last week he made a joke about how he would have found it funny if he ruined the life of another person in the CNTS life. At first, he thought it was just a fluke, but then he saw her and realized that she was related to the same Thatcher that he had almost killed all those years ago. He had only spared her because she was PRGNing back then. But now, he had the offspring of that woman in the palm of his hands, and he couldn't help but smile. Oh, how irony was bittersweet sometimes. Like mother like daughter, he supposed. Though, maybe he wouldn't. Copy the whole rigmarole. He was already doing the most with the whole death game thing. So he saw it as enough. And hey. Maybe it would finally get that beach of a woman to shut up if her daughter was dead. The child wasn't his daughter anyhow. No matter how much that beach whined and cried about it. It wasn't his fault he was tempted by her outfit. She shouldn't have been wearing those but shorts at the time. If she didn't want to be treated like a slot and like one, then she shouldn't have dressed like it back then. Besides, what was the term again? When you're a prisoner, you're at the whims of the prison MSTR. Yeah, that was the saying. And she was his prisoner. So it stood to reason that he could do whatever he wanted back then. Though, looking back at it, he kind of regretted it. That was a little much, even for him. Oh well, he would be able to rid of her and forget about that stupid thing he did. Though, speaking of stupid things. Maxwell looked down at the stack of papers on his desk, a small smile taking up his visage. It was a court summons, and frankly, he found it laughable. The fact that they would try and sue him was funny. At least, it was, until he realized that they were planning to sue him in Washington, and he had no control over there. He, and Tyler, to be exact. At least, it was a problem, until he told Tyler. Tyler said he'd deal with it personally, which was good. The less detractors, the better. Although, it was kind of funny. Out of all of the signatures on the piece of paper, he would have expected to see all of the parents have signed on to it. But after double and triple checking, there was one missing. That one, the one who didn't sign, was smart. That one most likely understood that it was a bad idea to go directly after them. If he ever got to meet her in person, he would probably give her props. After all, it takes a lot to push one's own feelings regarding their children to not sue the people who kidnapped them. Either that, or she didn't believe that nosy pastor. Or, the more nefarious idea, which was that she just didn't care. And if that was the case, that meant he was doing her a favor. And that would be oh so funny. All's well that ends well, Maxwell thought as he leaned back in his chair, kicking up his feet on the desk he sat in front of, before reaching over to press a big red button labeled Launch. It was the button that launched the drone that sent down the care package for the week. A smirk took up his visage as he watched the drone fly into one of the screens holding a massive package with military-grade rope. That'll surely get something going, and if it doesn't, then I'll have to do something of my own. As he thought that, he glanced over at the monitor that was focused on Luz Nocida and frowned. The information he had overheard regarding her was troubling. The fact of the matter was that she was the most dangerous one there, despite appearances. She needed to die, and soon. She was probably the only one that, if pushed too far, would have the chance to actually do something. After all, he had looked into every one of the people who he had decided to capture. And Luz? She was terrifying. If her criminal record was to be believed, she was the only one here who truly had the spine to kill, aside from Judy. While most people here had petty theft somewhere on there, and while some had mental health issues like Amelia and her psychopathy, and Kennedy with his bipolar disorder, Luz was the only one that he genuinely believed was a true threat to everyone who agreed to chip in with the death game idea. After all, you don't just walk away unconvicted from an attempted murder charge and not be a little F in the head. If he was remembering correctly, the victim of the attack was a girl by the name of Amber Sturwell. He didn't know the exact details, but it was 3 months ago, and the judge had given her a warning, and sentenced her to a month of house arrest. On top of that, the judge fined the mother $50,000 for negligence. It almost got her thrown out of her school, too. Fortunately, the principal of that school, Mr. Walker's, had come up with a way to keep her in the school. And that was, for some reason or another, sending her to reality check summer camp. How a number-crunching camp would fix that was something even he couldn't put together. Either way, because of that, she was his problem now, and he had the responsibility to do away with her. And after hearing about the power that she had, this, all for one, or whatever, from the security cameras, and after overhearing what it did, Maxwell knew that something needed to be done about it. If she was allowed to start acquiring power, and too much of it, then they would all be in big SHT. Especially if she snapped. Especially if she snapped. It was appropriate to say that she was like a walking, talking, living, breathing, ticking time bomb that could blow at even a single hint of pressure. And if she was allowed to blow up, then it would cause nothing but trouble for not only him but all of Gravesfield. Call it a gut feeling, but he believed that if Luz Nocida was allowed to live any longer, then all of Gravesfield would pay for it. The only question was, how? How to kill her without making it look personal. He glanced over to a monitor, where a red-haired boy dressed in a red shirt and brown cargo shorts was practicing doing something. If he had remembered his name, he was Cody Johnson. He was shadowboxing over in the corner of the Heavens Devil's base, and was using his, pyrokinesis powers. He was doing kick flips, strong jabs and punches, all of which ended in trails of flame. Flam. Burning flesh. Fire burns the flesh, and leaves nothing behind. Maxwell smiled. Yeah, that would work. He deployed a drone, and activated its microphone and camera, before flying it over to the base of the Heavens Devils. It didn't take long to make it to the specific area where Cody was training, and as soon as it got close, Maxwell turned on his microphone and cleared his throat. Once he got Cody's attention, Maxwell spoke. Cody Johnson, I have a job for you. If you complete it, I'll give you and a person of your choosing immunity to the rest of the game, and let you go home early. Luz couldn't sleep. Well, it wasn't that she couldn't sleep, but it was more like she didn't want to sleep. If she slept, it would mean she'd have to talk to him again. And yes, she was aware that she looked like a zombie, and had passed out a few times standing up, but the last thing she wanted to do was see him again. To put it simply, Shigaraki terrified her. The more she thought about what he said, she couldn't help but realize that he was right. Not only was he right, but he was hauntingly, and horrifyingly correct. Thinking about his words made her realize that she wanted to strip power from those she believed didn't deserve it. She truly wanted to make those who wronged her suffer. After all, anyone would want that, right? She wasn't crazy for thinking that way, was she? A little revenge never hurt anyone, right? But, then again, that wasn't how her mother raised her. Her mother didn't raise a monster. She didn't. She didn't. But then, if that was the case, then why did she do that one thing a few months ago? She and Mama never talked about it. It was what had caused them to be extremely strapped for cash. The fine for it came out of her college fund, and that was when Mama's drinking problem got even worse than it had been. It had been that one incident that caused all of this. Of course, there was the trouble she was causing at the school with her antics, but it was that incident that put Amber in the hospital for weeks and caused her mama to send her here. Well, not here per se, but to reality check summer camp. Maybe the lack of sleep was causing her to think irrationally. Which was why she had been lying down in her bed in the cabin, staring up at the bottom of the mattress above her. She was wearing a different set of clothing, that being a purple shirt with a wide collar and a pair of black baggy pants. Oh, and a pair of rainbow-themed socks, for added measure. She wanted to sleep, but she couldn't bring herself to close her eyes. She was tired, but not really. And every time she closed her eyes, she could see his face. It had gotten to the point that she had been genuinely afraid to fall asleep. Because if she did, she'd run into him. There was no doubting the fact that he was evil, vile, and manipulative. To say he wasn't was to say that Kim Jong-un wasn't a dictator, which was a blatant and obvious lie. And what made this whole thing worse was that he was in her head, or, better put, in her dreams, like Freddy Krueger from Nightmare on Elm Street. Luz sat up, resting a hand on her forehead, frowning as she did. Her eyes were heavier than a bag of bricks, but there was nothing she could do to sleep. Counting sheep? Nah, wouldn't work. Singing a lullaby in her head? It just got her excited and made her think of a different song. Nothing worked, so, instead of continuing to do the impossible, she turned to face the wall of the cabin, and the other beds. It was nighttime, and most of, if not everyone else who was a part of the Alpha Squadron, was asleep, split up between the two cabins. She shared a cabin with the girls, the sole exception being Stanley. He slept at the back, though, so it didn't matter. And besides, he didn't snore, so that was good. If he did, she would have preferred to sleep outside. But, that was irrelevant to right now. Right now, she was staring down the empty bed that Julia usually slept in. Luz had caught what she looked like sleeping before, and she didn't know how to describe it. The best she could do was as if she was staring down an angel peacefully resting. But right now, she wasn't there. Maybe she was out on a walk. That was possible. Luz looked down at her hands, and frowned, staring at the holes in her palms yet again. She regarded them with disdain. She hated her power, now more than ever. Each passing day, now that she had been made aware of it, she resented looking down at her hands. It was a reminder that she was cursed with a power that wasn't a true match for her. No matter what the old fart living in her head told her, All for One did not, nor would it ever match her. Or does it? Luz thought, cringing slightly. The fact that there was any doubt in her mind at all regarding All for One upset her greatly. Because while what Shigaraki said struck a chord with her, it wasn't enough for her to fully agree with him. She wanted to make those who wronged her pay. She wanted those with power who didn't deserve it to suffer. All of that was true, and anyone who said that she wouldn't hurt a fly either didn't truly know her or had a wishy-washy basic understanding of her. The only thing that she didn't do was that she didn't act out her fantasies. At least, most of the time, she hadn't. The only time she had, she nearly killed the person who had been her target. The person who had made her snap. Luz remembered it clearly. As if it had happened the other day. She remembered every detail, every word said, every action committed. Burned into her mind for her to forever remember until she died. To remind her what would happen if she had ever let herself get out of control. It was a Friday afternoon. She had been walking home from school that day, and the rumors that something was between herself and Mr. Jones began at the beginning of that week. She had been non-stop harassed, despite the staff's best efforts. The worst part was that she had known that it was because she and Mr. Jones had been caught hanging out at lunch. And by whom? Amber Sturwell. The same girl who had insulted her dead dad. The same girl who had been relentlessly teasing her and bullying her for the last few months, borderlining on a year. The same girl that hated her for no reason other than, just because. And Luz had started to have had enough of it. But it hadn't gotten to the point where she felt like she had to do something about it. Besides, while the rumor was awful, it wasn't something she couldn't disprove. It was very simple, if she had done what the rumors had said, then why hadn't he been arrested? For as much as she had iffy opinions of her mother, she would have known almost immediately if something like that was happening. So, if something like that had truly been happening, her mother would have called the cops so quickly, that it wasn't even funny. No. It wasn't that had set her off. Nor was it the comment she had made about her dad months prior. It was what she had tried to pull earlier in the morning. Or, more like, what she did do. You see, Luz had recently gotten herself the first installment of the sequel series of The Good Witch Azura, that being Azura and the Foul Moon. It was supposed to take 20 years after the events of the first series, and she had been excited for it to come out. It was a birthday present from her mother. Something that she had jumped for joy about. If her father was still around, he would have been all over that book and then some. After all, it was he who had gotten her into the series, and her mother did say that he was really into the series. So, when she got it, she brought it to school to read at lunch. And then along came Amber. She took one good look at what Luz was doing, she decided to do something that had broken the proverbial camel's back. She took the book and used a lighter that she used to smoke to burn it at the back of the school, with her other lackeys holding her down while she did. But, instead of crying or sobbing about it, she simply got angry. And not the explosive kind of anger, but the silent kind of anger. The kind of anger one would have when something had pissed them off so badly that they couldn't vocalize it. So, the next day, she did something that she grew to regret. Not because of what she had done to Amber, but because of everything else regarding the situation. She had brought the butcher knife to school again. This time, however, she had done so on purpose. She waited until the end of the day, till school broke out, knowing that Amber had cheerleader practice. She followed Amber, making sure not to be seen. Prior to coming to school that day, she had stayed up a little bit past her bedtime, and when her mother was asleep, she had sharpened the butcher knife, that way it was extra sharp. She had doubts of her own when she had prepared to do it. Thinking if it was worth it. She decided that it was. When Amber got to the changing rooms, Luz followed her in. She remembered the look of disgust on Amber's face. And how quickly it went from one of admonishment to one of fear as she lunged at her with the knife. She still remembered, with full clarity, just how loud Amber's screams were when she plunged the knife into her stomach and repeatedly stabbed her multiple times. She still remembered the coldness she felt as she made direct eye contact with her the whole time, not saying a single word to her. She still remembered how the clawing at her wrists felt, not that it mattered. She remembered the smell of her blood. How sickly sweet it was. Some had splashed on her clothes, which annoyed her. She had heard how strong it had been to clean blood out of clothing. The final thing that she had remembered about the confrontation she had with Amber was how she went slack after a while. She was fairly certain she had been there for a whole minute, plunging the blade into her. 80 times. She had stabbed Amber 80 times. It was a miracle that she had survived. And extremely unfortunate. To say that Luz had been fully committed to killing her when she had attacked was an understatement. The only thing that stopped her merciless attack was when the janitor pulled her off of Amber and restrained her after calling the police and an ambulance. Had it not been for him, Amber would have been dead, and Luz would have been in a prison cell for the rest of her life. The only reason why she hadn't gone to jail was for a few reasons. 1. The attack, while premeditated, was able to be twisted into a self-defense attack because not only were the cameras off for repairs in the changing rooms where the attack happened, making it ambiguous on who struck first. Furthermore, Amber had been provoking her and tempting fate for nearly a year, so even if Luz had been the one who attacked Amber, then it was after months and months of constant abuse, meaning that her state-appointed lawyer had been able to twist it in Luz's favor. 2. While the attack wounds on Amber were still proof of the attack happening, no one had said they had seen Luz enter the changing rooms with Amber, and while the janitor did testify, he was drunk, having been drinking on the job when he had both made the call to the police and said that he had seen Luz being the one who had attacked Amber, so that meant that his testimony could be shaky at best. Something the jury agreed with, having thrown it out. 3. Her age. Luz was still a minor, and couldn't be tried as an adult until she turned 16 years old. So that came in clutch to avoid what would have been a surefire life sentence in prison. Furthermore, it was argued that due to her young age, the constant stress and abuse put on her by Amber, and the lack of help the staff provided in order to prevent this tragedy from happening, by technicality, the real people who were to blame would be the school itself. And finally, 4. Amber was still alive. She didn't die, meaning that, while her appointed defense attorney said that attempted murder was good enough, combined with everything that he had provided to the judge and jury, he believed that Luz was, for the most part, innocent in what she had supposedly done. The prosecutor, on the other hand, felt the opposite. Deeming her a danger to society due to her willingness to jump to violence. The prosecutor did everything in his power to tear down the defense attorney's arguments, but the DA had a solid case, built on evidence. All the prosecutor had was conjecture and flimsy alibis and testimonies. But, by the time it was all said and done, Luz was still found guilty of attempted murder. Although, luckily for Luz, the judge was surprisingly lenient, and let her off with a warning, her mother a fine for negligence. Furthermore, he also made it so that, rather than having to spend any time in a cell, she was put on a house arrest order for a month. The only time she was allowed to exit the house was when she went to school. The final thing he forced to happen, which had been much to her annoyance and something that she had completely forgotten about, was for her to be sent somewhere to deal with her problems, and recommended a strict summer camp. He never specified what camp she was to be sent to, hence why she was sent to reality check and not somewhere else. Why he didn't recommend a therapist, Luz would never understand, but at the end of the day, it didn't matter. It was the judge's choice, not hers. Her house arrest PRD had been up for 2 months now, though it made no difference to how she lived her life. It was kind of ironic, really. It was supposed to be a punishment, but it turned out to be just more of the same. And while she was imprisoned here, she was technically a free woman, despite her horrible crime. Sure, she probably wouldn't be able to get a traditional job, but she didn't care. She had well over 10,000 subscribers on YouTube and had gotten onto the payment program. Her AMVs constantly got around 53k views and made well over $500 a video. And while she didn't upload frequently, any money was good money. One would expect her to feel guilt for what she did. After all, she had almost ended the life of another living, breathing person. And if not for that, then for how it financially ruined them. But, she didn't. She felt zero remorse for what she had done. Amber deserved worse in her opinion. But, what was done was done. There was nothing that could be done about it. There was a restraining order placed on her, and Amber had skipped town after what came out had come out about her. Ironically, she had been the one sleeping with a teacher. Mr. Morgan, if she had remembered correctly. So, it was a little bit of self-projection in the end, wasn't it? On the bright side, at least she would never have to see her repugnant face again. So, frankly, at the end of the day, it didn't matter. It was a win-win in her books as far as she was concerned. Her mother? Not so much, but then again, as of late, she hadn't really cared about what her mother thought. Or what she would think. Or anything she did, really. That being said, while she didn't feel guilty about what she had done to Amber, she had felt guilty about the whole situation surrounding it. Despite her current feelings on the woman, she felt guilty for dragging her mother into the mess and making her alcohol problem worse. And while that didn't excuse what she had said before she left for camp, she could only imagine how much worse of a time her mama was having right about now. That aside, she wondered if that moment, that crime she had committed, contributed to awakening the power that she had now. To awaken all for one. Objectively speaking, she had committed an evil act. Evil begets evil, so to speak. So, the fact that she was willing to do horrible things like that could have been one of the key factors to awakening it. Luz sighed, standing up from her bed as she did. She knew that, for the longest time, she needed to be checked into a therapist for all of the bullshit stirring around in her mind, but after recalling all of that nonsense, she knew now more than ever that it was needed. Maybe, if she survived, and after she distanced herself from her mother, she'd do that. After all, this was partially her mother's fault. If she hadn't been so hell-bent to send her to this place, she wouldn't be in this situation, now would she? If she had just let her stay home, then she wouldn't have been in danger of dying. She looked over to the others, peacefully sleeping, or, as peacefully as they could. Her eyes landed on Arla, who had been curled up into a ball. Earlier, she had been crying, most likely because she was scared. Not that Luz blamed her, but right now, she was too tired to emote. Her eyes lingered on Arla, and for a brief second, she thought about using all for one. While she had said that it was an awful power, her curiosity was palpable, to say the very least. And while she found the whole concept of ripping away something so personal from someone to be disgusting, for all she knew, it might not have been as bad as she had imagined. However, again, there was the problem of figuring out how to use it. How was she going to use it without coming across as a horrible person? She couldn't just walk up to someone, place her hand on their head, and drain them of their power because she was testing it out, and then not expect to get beat up. It was wrong. It was gross. It might as well have been a form of RPE. And yet, for some strange reason, the urge she had to do it was almost unbearable. It had been mounting up for the last few days, and maybe it was because she hadn't slept, but she felt like a DMN about to burst. The sweat trailing down the side of her face was a testament to that. But even so, it was wrong. And while she had done a bad thing before, that didn't mean she wanted to do another, equally as bad thing again. Looking away from Arla, Luz frowned. All for one. Luz murmured, looking down at her hands again, for the second time in the hour, before frowning. A power of the chosen one. Her frown transformed into a scowl before she scoffed. Yeah, if they're a villain. Luz grumbled. And with that, she stepped outside of the cabin, stopped just before the campfire pit, and looked up into the night sky. When she first saw the stars in the sky, she thought them to be appealing, majestic even. But now, she didn't really care. Probably because she was tired. They lost their spectacle and became just another thing for her tired eyes to distract herself with. She walked over to the put-out campfire, and sat down on one of the logs, draping her arms over her legs as she leaned forward. A wave of various emotions came over her. Anger, sadness, frustration, and worst of all, stress. Nothing had happened in the last 4 days, which was weirding her out. No contact had been made with the other two teams, no one wanted to leave the confines of the base, and no one had mentioned anything about seeing anyone nearby. All of it was causing her paranoia to skyrocket. What were they planning? Were they planning to invade one another? Wipe each other out? Were they planning to team up and attack them? She didn't know, and it was freaking her out. More so due to the fact that, again, she wasn't thinking straight, which she knew. Luz groaned, looking down at the ground with a frown on her face. How was she supposed to be a leader while she was sleep-deprived and unable to function properly without bugging out? She had hardly any confidence in herself from the get-go, and to make matters worse, she couldn't keep a coherent thought together for longer than a few seconds before her brain began to shut down from tiredness. Luz was annoyed. That much was obvious. Everyone here was, but there was something else boiling within her that had been allowed to seep out ever so slightly. Her anger. The last time her anger exploded was when the thing with Amber happened. And now, she could feel it happen again. There was one person whose fault this really was. Her stress, her lack of sleep, the fact that she was here now instead of at the place she was supposed to be at. Governor Roger Maxwell. For some, unknown, stupid reason, a smile began to take up her face. It spread from one side of her face to the other, the corners of her mouth upturned in a predatory, downright manic smile. Her eyes gleamed with the same calm, cold rage that a serial killer would inhabit. And there was only one thought bouncing around in her head. One of revenge. Once this is over, Maxwell is going to pay for this with his life. Luz. And just then, she was broken out of her thoughts, causing her to look in the direction of where the voice had come from, and it was none other than. So alright folks, that's all for today. Stay tuned for part 4. Do subscribe, like and share for more such videos. Also check out the story and author Deathly Jazz Hands 55 on fanfiction.net. Press the bell icon to be notified first on release. See you in the next video. Till then, goodbye.